In this episode of Travelogue, we learn why Tibet's autonomous region is called the roof of the world, as we set out for the mother of all mountains, Everest, or as the locals call it, Mount Qomolangma. Now this is my kind of Tibet. We've got the great outdoors, I'm surrounded by mountains, I've got Tibet's longest river, the Yarlung flowing next to me. It's also the world's highest major river, and in this episode we're heading out from Lhasa, travelling through Gyantse prefecture to arrive at Everest Base Camp, so it's going to be a pretty incredible adventure. So, wish us luck. I'm Tianran, and welcome to this episode of Travelogue. Our journey will take us some 700 kilometers across the Tibetan Plateau and into the Himalayas. As if that isn't grueling enough, we'll be experiencing splitting headaches, nausea and fatigue caused by the thin air and lack of oxygen. It will really be an uphill struggle. That is a pretty gorgeous view, but had to rest earlier because I'm still suffering from altitude sickness. Pretty high up, we're 4,888 meters above sea level. If you don't believe me, I took a screenshot earlier. And currently we're on one of the peaks of Qomolangma Mountain, which faces one of the three most sacred lakes here in Tibet. This is Gyantse Lake, and every year people will circle around it, spending about a month's time to complete the entire route, but it's equivalent to paying a pilgrimage to Lhasa, and once they're done, they're basically blessed for the whole year, so that was definitely worth it. What I really want is to be blessed with less of a headache, though. There's a popular belief that this lake is somehow connected to the life energy of Tibetans, and that if it were ever to dry up, Tibet would be no more. Despite the beauty of our surroundings, the high altitude is taking a toll on my body. I'm constantly short of breath, and my legs feel about 20 kilos heavier. I can't imagine what it'd be like to live up here. I know this seems a little bit cowardly, but honestly speaking, I'm so happy to be in this nice, warm car while it's pouring outside. The thing about traveling through the Tibetan Plateau is you kind of realize how fragile and weak you are compared to the rest of your environment. I mean, look outside. Look at this massive expanse of just raw nature. And then, you know, you think that nobody lives here, and then you pass by a shepherd with his flock while it's pouring down outside, and it's just a normal day for him. I just feel incredibly lucky, to be honest. Our next stop is Gyantse, a historically important town that was once the third largest in Tibet. Here we are. Finally arrived in Gyantse County, and that behind me is its most famous landmark, the Gyantse Castle, which has a bit of a sad story because just after the turn of the 20th century, the Brits invaded Tibet, and back then the Tibetans had pretty antiquated matchlock rifles, whereas the Brits had machine guns, so you can kind of guess who won. But in order to not be captured, all of the defending Tibetans jumped from the top of the castle, which is why we have this monument to heroes today. But on a slightly brighter note, the castle is one of the best preserved in Tibet, and its architectural style went on to influence another castle, which influenced the Potala Palace, which is why you might see some similarities between what we see here and what we saw in Lhasa. Known in Tibetan as Adzong, this is one of the best preserved fortresses in Tibet. Wow, I feel pretty powerful standing here. So that castle was originally a palace which was founded by the grandson of the last king of the Tibetan Empire. So that would have been over 1,000 years ago. But what we see now was mostly built in the 14th century. And this place would have been the most important site in Gyantse because it was a site of military, political and religious power. because of its strategic location. Anyone coming in from India, from Bhutan, from Nepal would have to pass by here. Anyone going on to Lhasa, to Gyantse Prefecture would have to pass by here as well, which is why this entire place is so heavily fortified.
In the past, Tibet was divided into districts, also called zongs. More than just a fortress, the zong was the heart and soul of a region. In this respect, Gyantse Zong was particularly important because it sat at the crossroads of several ancient trade routes.
Oh, what a view, though. Oh, wow. This is definitely the best visual guide to how important our location is. So if you take that road going that way, you'll eventually reach India and Bhutan, but if you go that way instead, you'll reach Gyantse Prefecture. But then if you head that way, you reach Lhasa. So we're basically in the middle of a golden triangle. And over there is the Baidu Temple, which is the only temple in Tibet that has 3 different schools of Tibetan Buddhism combined. And next to it is a pagoda built in the style that was popular during the 13th to 15th century, something you don't see very much anymore. But even the temple is surrounded by fortified walls, which just shows you how strategically important this location was.
However, by the end of the 15th century, Gyantse's importance had begun to wane. In the past, Tibet was a feudal society ruled over by monks and aristocrats. They owned serfs, who were basically slaves attached to the land. During the 17th century, one of the 4 most powerful family clans in Tibet was based here. This is the home of the Pala clan, who would have owned pretty much everything in Gyantse, including its people.
This is the Gyantse house. 对对对，奴隶最怕它。对对对。有一个雕塑，管家是戴这种帽子是吧？对对对对。那管家是他们自己雇的人，还是他也是庄主手下的一个奴隶啊，就级别比较高，比较高的，对对。他会有什么工具吗？有，你看后面有他的这些刑具啊，这是个手铐啊，这个是打脸的嘛，掌嘴的。打脸的。哦，对，牛皮做的啊。这些是抽奴隶的这些鞭子。 牛皮鞭嘛，像这些东西哦，当时，管家收租粮食的工具。过去他这个庄园主的手下家奴年薪有24克粮食，就是这个24的粮食。那这个是属于很高的工资了吧？怎么说家奴的年薪工资嘛？这些都是当时管家收租粮食的。他也是像个会计似的。对对对对。这边是个议事厅。啊，这里边的东西挺精致的呀。他这个议事厅的话，解放以前。 他们家族成员的议事和宴请场的地方，现在这个庄园里面最大的陈列展是这个房间了啊。现在这里面呢，看到庄主当时用过的这些什么生活起居、宗教的用品、体育用品等等东西。对，我看到这有好多国外的一些药是吧？所以说呢，他这个最后一代庄园主在英国留过学的人，会3种语言，还会懂医，会看病嘛。哇，这里面是药，上面呢都是。 藏药啊，中间这些是西药和药具。Yeah, I see penicillin. 对。There's a boot cream. 创作贴。创作贴，那时候应该还没有的吧？从国外进口过来的。我看这有好多是酒吗？酒，洋酒。They've got whiskey. Whiskey. They've got chicory here and some vinegar. 那这个属于当时西藏就是独一无二的是吧？是，他这个庄主。 的话就是看出他对那个什么西方文化和中原文化的那个这个挺开放的。
Despite originally being from Bhutan, the Pala clan very quickly joined the ranks of Tibet's ruling elite. 日光石啊！对，这里小心头啊！这门槛为什么都那么低啊？
他这个门修的这么低的原因，这个说法是故意挡鬼挡僵尸的。 咱们这人是会弯腰的，进门的时候会弯腰的，僵尸不会弯腰，进不了，故意挡僵尸才修地的这个说法。他们只能就是对对对，说法硬了是吧？就这个说法修地的。那这应该是他们的 是不是主卧呀，还是客厅？
这个日光室是庄园主要是它冬天的卧室。
哦。
到了下午的时候，太阳光线这边。
The Lord was no stranger to luxury. The items in this room, from the gilded saddle to the leopard skins and vintage gramophone, would have just been regular decorations to him.
这些什么当时各种动物皮做的这些。
哇，这边的视野是不错哈。
它冬天晒太阳，因为的话，可以监督二层这个奴隶的工作嘛。
对。它这边好像庄园也挺大的哈，应该也住了很多人。
过去它这个建筑的话，5000多平米啊，就前面有一个院子，这是中间的这个院子，后面还有它的后花园嘛。庄主还有夫人、管家和奴隶加起来的话，就是100多个。
那当时他们的地啊、羊啊、牛啊也应该很多吧？
多，有什么3万多亩土地，3000多名奴隶，14900多头大小牲畜。整个西藏它有了37座庄园。
反正当年这前面肯定都是平的，然后这前面的地都是他们的。
对，这一块都是他的。
Coming up next, we arrive in Tibet's second largest city to discover a monastery so big that it's pretty much a city of its own.
Remember when I said Gyantse Castle influenced another castle which influenced the Fatala Palace? So the other castle is Samdrutzong, which overlooks the city of Gyantse, the second largest here in Tibet after Lhasa. And now that I'm here, I'm one step closer to my final destination.
Although Gyantse is sometimes called the gateway to Everest, most visitors come here for a different reason. A quick browse through its markets, and you'll realize that the majority of the goods are aimed at pilgrims. That's because Gyantse is home to the Tashilhunpo Monastery, one of the largest working religious institutions in Tibet, and home to the Panchen Lama, one of the most important figures in Tibetan Buddhism.
Wow. So if there's just one temple you're going to visit here in Gyantse, it's got to be the Tashilhunpo Monastery, because not only is it the seat of the Panchen Lama, it's also one of the 4 big monasteries devoted to the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism.
Though it's the newest school of Tibetan Buddhism, Gelug is also its most popular.
Oh my word. This is absolutely immense. Man, it's like a mini city in here. Obviously the temple's up there at the top of the mountain, and I guess these smaller buildings, maybe the Lama's dormitories, I'll have to ask around. I can see myself getting lost in here though.
Founded by the first Dalai Lama in the 15th century, at its height, Tashilhunpo Monastery was home to over 4,000 monks. Today there are some 800 residing here, and one of them is my guide, Basang. I'm curious as to why he decided to pursue the monastic life.
那就是当时是什么心态啊？就出家时候？
当时也算一个小孩嘛，就是说就是个喜欢嘛，喜欢当僧人，自己觉得当僧人，比较很幸福的那个，
对，
心愿嘛，来这边当僧人的，而且呢，父母亲也同意了，在这边帮我找老师，这样吧，
那当时，您出家的时候，家人是怎么想的？
他主要还是在我们这个藏族民族一个习惯嘛就是家里呢有了一个僧人他觉得这个比较荣幸对。
那当时就是怎么进来的？是像考大学似的吗？就是必须得分是足够的，然后呢得申请啊？
主要就是自己申请嘛。
咱们这边有什么要求啊？
年龄规定的话，基本上都是10岁到18岁这段时间。 年龄啊。先是在寺院里面学习藏文的书法、背诵经书，还有学习藏文的这个语法等等。然后自己主要还是那个背诵的经书嘛，134页的经书背好了，要参加考试，通过了，他呢才受戒才能当僧了嘛，也就是成立。
这跟上学也一样，也是得考过这个关是吧？
是。
Of the many temples and halls in this monastery, this is perhaps the most spectacular. Inside is the world's largest gilded statue of Maitreya. He's known as the future Buddha and is prophesied to appear on earth at a time when Buddhism has been all but forgotten. The other halls contain the enshrined remains of previous Panchen lamas, more gilded statues, and countless intricate murals. It's truly a treasure trove of Tibetan Buddhist relics.
又去诵经了。
对。我们藏语叫错心大殿，就相当跟咱们内地佛教寺院的大雄宝殿的意思。
This is the oldest hall in the monastery, and for me, it's also the most magical. In addition to reciting sutras, the monks of Tashilhunpo also get to debate them. Twice a day they'll gather together and put what they've learned to the test. And contrary to what you might expect of a Buddhist, the monks here can seem downright aggressive.
我看这环境太热闹了。
对，这个就是呢，正在师傅们在辩经就是这个学习的啊。他那个面对面啊，他两个人这样呢，互相就是打辩论。他是呢理解佛经的内容啊。我们看到这个手术动作啊，那个姿势是呢，拍手呢就是提问啊，他那个对面的呢就是回答，这样嘛，就是互相打辩论，他是理解佛经的内容啊。
那他们打这个姿势是有什么讲究吗？
姿势呢，就是拿佛珠啊，右手拍，左手这边往上拉就是呢，就是在下三界里面的众生拉回到往上面就这样一个这样。
我看有些人打得很激烈，好像都快吵起来，都快打起来似的。
对，是辩经场面，我们一看就是像那个非常激动的那种样子对。
Having left their past behind them, these monks will spend their entire lives here. This is the family they've chosen. For me, Tashilhunpo Monastery has been a fascinating glimpse into a unique way of life, a world so far removed from our own. Coming up next, we finally arrive at Everest Base Camp, but the mountain is nowhere to be seen. Perhaps a visit to the world's highest monastery will fix that. Having left Tashilhunpo Monastery behind us, we've now entered the final leg of our journey. Next stop, Everest Base Camp.
You see this? We're climbing at a rate of about a meter a second. At the very top, around 5,200 meters above sea level, is the Travelogue Pass. And from there, if we're lucky, we might get a view of Everest. It was raining earlier today. The sun's come out. There's still a bunch of clouds, so we'll see. Here's hoping. So you see the road down there. That's the road that we just took. All in all, there are 108 loops, 108 being an auspicious number in Buddhism. Sun's come out, but unfortunately just clouds everywhere. I don't think it's going to disperse, so we're just going to head on to our next destination, Rongbuk Monastery, which supposedly has the best view of Mount Everest, Qomolangma.
Qomolangma means Holy Mother in Tibetan. How appropriate for the mother of all mountains.
I can't believe it, we're almost at our final destination. We've travelled for so long, seen so many places, but the Himalayan mountain range is just right in front of us. And as you can see from the sign, we're this close to Mount Everest. Or as they call it over here, Mount Qomolangma. Wow, man, I never thought I'd see the day, but here we are, Everest Base Camp, over 5,000 meters above sea level, and if it wasn't for the clouds, Qomolangma, Mount Everest would be right in front of our eyes. Unfortunately, I mean, just going to have to wait for the clouds to disperse again. But they call this place Tent City because this, as a tourist, is your last refueling stop before heading out. Here you can grab food. You can even stay here overnight, and during climbing season, the expeditionary base camp is actually 5 kilometers that away, but I don't think I'm going to be climbing Mount Everest anytime soon. However, one really cool thing you can do as a tourist is to come here to the post office and grab a postcard from Everest Base Camp, which is probably the coolest thing you can show off to your friends and family. Of the world. To my wife, from the top of the world.
Unfortunately, as the clouds continue to roll in, it seems we're not destined to see Qomolangma today.
Alright guys, so we're going to spend the night here at Everest Base Camp, which is definitely a thing to write home about. Never actually spent a night at an elevation this high. Our driver and some of the other guys are already asleep. Tomorrow, hopefully, we'll have a nice clear view of Everest. But as for now, it's time for me to hit the hay and join the rest of the crew. This is me. Good night, guys. Oh, morning, guys. Oh, pretty cold and very foggy. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, we'll see if we get to see Everest later. Slept pretty well last night. It was actually really warm in that tent, and didn't suffer from altitude sickness at all. My director, however, who was next to me, was sucking on oxygen all last night, so glad I wasn't him. Going to head up to Rongbuk Monastery, which is the closest temple to Mount Everest, and supposedly there's a fantastic view of Qomolangma from its terrace, and I guess we'll just have to see. We'll just have to wait and see.
At 8,844 meters, Qomolangma is the highest mountain in the world. At its foot sits perhaps the highest monastery in the world, Rongbuk Monastery. It's now manned by just one monk, who tells me that the legendary master Padmasambhava, widely considered a second Buddha by Tibetan Buddhists, once meditated in a cave beneath this place. In more recent history, this monastery has become a site of pilgrimage, not just for Tibetan Buddhists, but also mountaineers, one of whom has a special connection to this monk.
我听说就是您出家之前有2个儿子，然后其中一位登过10次珠峰。
那是。
您是很骄傲吗？还是很担心呢？第一次他登珠峰的时候有什么感受？
他的就是这个啦，별이 세는 것만 나 탑져버렸어 그라. 근데 등장学校现在他주인데 괜히 맞추는세네. 기tam니 맞추는세. 그런 게 소통체. 그런 것도 로종다때 지니. 다 진짜 별이 망부지다 죽게. 아 별이 잡아 맛에 별이 참나 강티지네. 다 동구미. 네팔링미 페미카. 시자이나 네팔링미 프니리가 그라. 근데 네팔링 팀이가 오늘 동고랑이 되니. 야, 다 별이 있잖니. 되니 제제 망부족에 가라. 참을로만 시게 되니 담불링 리더니 다 텔레타 합니다. 제제 좋아하는 걸레탄데 리토버리 걸라. 오늘 근데다 제제 유바데. 부구디 간지 작지는라. 부구디 찍고 삼로 못동 아디 미강보다 자인나다도 저인나다도 롱이나 검보치자지 아디 닝제 다 걸레 간다지도 삼리심다틱도 죽식라.
那您有您儿子登珠峰的照片吗？
对，
有，能看看吗？
那是
啊。哦。
低音吧这个。
哇，这是您的儿子。
对。
哇，很帅啊。那他们那个爬珠峰之前，您的荣布寺是在这个位置，他们会过来拜一下吗？
윤거래가 천자도 윤거래 다들 좁강데 로벤 빼마 중네 두바 작시티니 담불릉니 리니 딜레타 네리 딜레타 강보 돌아랑제 당자니 천자 중에 가나 윤거래가 천자 중에 계속 근데들라 인제 삼니들라 샵지 슈요 새로 지들라.
Oh my God, I can't believe it. I mean, we were waiting for hours and honestly didn't expect this to happen, but right there in front of us is the peak of Qomolangma, Mount Everest, peaking between the clouds. I mean, this honestly is a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I think the places that we visited here really are what people imagine when they think of Tibet. I mean, this entire region has a kind of rugged, raw beauty that seems as if it's been here since the start of time, and long after we finished walking the earth, it will still be here. And I think this is what draws people here to the roof of the world. I'm Tianran, and I hope you've enjoyed watching this episode of Travelogue in China.